so ignorant, right? How could you possibly live your life not even knowing the answer to this very simple, basic question about the whole situation, right? I mean, the way like primitive man used to look up at the sky and primitive women and think, they had no idea what they were looking at, right? The way we think about them, future societies will think about us. But that, to me, that's exciting because it means we have things to discover. But tonight I want to focus on this question: what is the universe made out of? After all, I dedicated my professional career to this question. And so you might wonder, like, is this a reasonable question to ask? I think it is. It's a pretty basic question. I want to know, what am I made out of? What are you made out of, right? What is the whole organizing principle behind this amazing universe we live in, right? It's a pretty reasonable question. I think probably it's also an ancient question. I think people have been asking this question since people have been asking questions, right? I mean, all you need to be inspired about this question is to have a couple of rocks. Smash them together, you get smaller rocks, right? Smash those together, you get smaller rocks. And you can wonder, like, how long can I do this for? Do the rocks just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Or can you get infinitely small rocks? Or at some point, does it stop being a rock and turn into something else, right? That, to me, I actually remember asking myself this question as a kid. So maybe it's not a surprise I became a particle physicist. But I like to imagine that if particle physicists were superheroes, this would be like our origin myth, right? This is how it all began. But then we'd have to all wear capes to work, and they get stuck in the Hadron Collider, and that would be uncomfortable. Okay, so imagine that you are this caveman or cavewoman physicist, and you are tackling this question the first time, right? You're the first person to ever ask this question: what is the universe made out of? How do you begin, right? How do you tackle such a big question? Well, in science, a useful approach is to just start with the simplest thing, right? How do you approach it? Well, the simplest approach. So the simplest approach might be just make a list, right? Look around you and say, what's in the universe? And so since it's caveman, cavewoman times, of course, you say, well, there's me, and there's you, and there's rocks, and there's other rocks, and you start to build a long list, right? And problem number one is that there's a lot of rocks in the universe, right? So your list is going to be really, really long, right? Problem number two, of course, is that there's not just rocks in the universe. There's lots of other things also in the universe. And so as you look around you, you realize that the universe has, and also the rock, of course, right? And as you look around you realize the universe has lots of interesting things, right? There is rocks, of course, but there's blueberries, and there's ice cream, and there's mushrooms, and there's all sorts of stuff that make the universe a fun place to be, right? And the more you look, the more you're amazed at the kinds of things that there are in the universe. And if you're going to answer this question, what is the universe made out of, you can't just explain the rocks, right? You have to explain all the incredible complexity. And it's an intimidating amount of complexity. I mean, it's almost infinite, the variety of stuff that we see out there. I mean, there's bicycles and top hats and strangely muscular guys become governor of California. I mean, it's a weird and beautiful universe that we live in, right? And that's one of the things. One day I will look that good. That's one of the things that makes it a nice universe to be in, right? That it's not just rocks, but it makes it difficult because if you want to answer this question, what is the universe made out of, you have to explain all of the complexity that we see, which is a big job, right? Okay, so maybe the list approach is not the right way to do it. And in fact, we're not botanists, right? We're particle physicists, and so we don't just make lists and say we're done. We try to understand them. And so the way we do that is we organize our knowledge. We sort things into categories and we look for patterns. And those patterns lead to questions. And those questions are the clues that will lead us to finding out what's underneath, right? What's an actual insightful answer to the question, what is the universe made out of? Because if you ask me, what's the universe made out of, and I gave you a list, you wouldn't think, aha, I get it, right? There's no insight there. Instead, what we want to do is peel back a layer of reality and see what's underneath. We want to explain all of this complexity in terms of a simpler set of objects, right? That's the goal to answering the question, what is the universe made out of? All right, so you can argue, like, does Arnold belong in the rock category, the living thing category? But the point is, everything goes in a category, and then you see these patterns, and you ask questions, and those questions will lead you to understanding. And so We've made some progress, of course, since the days of caveman, cavewoman physicists, and these days we've actually in a pretty good shape to answering this question. I mean, you can describe everything that you've ever seen, or sat on, or tasted, or any human has ever interacted with in any way in terms of just the elements of the periodic table, right? A few basic building blocks. Now, you might be thinking, this guy's supposed to be a particle physicist, right? But now he's telling us about basic high school chemistry. Well, it's basic high school chemistry, but in my view, it's also one of the most underrated intellectual achievements in human history. Why? Well, if our goal is to explain the infinite complexity of the stuff that we see, right? Well, this boils it down to just 100 basic building blocks. And from there, if your goal is to get it down to 1, well, you're already most of the way there, right? The hardest part is to go from infinity down to a small finite number. The rest is really just details. So I think this is widely underrated, excuse me. And so it's impressive, and it makes you wonder, why is it even possible, right? Why does the universe work in this way, where most of the complexity arises from the arrangement of simple things, right? It's like we live in a universe designed